How do I do that? Oh.
Where's the press?
Should we give it a minute? All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. This is our first of our Redwire Space Tech Talk series. This is the one with the reunion. No, actually, we have some really important topics to discuss today. I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for today, our Vice President of Government Relations, Suzanne Gillen. We have Mike Gold, who is our Executive Vice President of Civil Space and External Affairs. And our guest, thank you for coming again, former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. With that, I'll give it to Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Terry. Yes, applause. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Terry said, I'm Suzanne Gillen, the Vice President of Government Relations for Redwire, and I'm honored to be here today with two people who I had the pleasure to work for at NASA and at Maxar with Mike before. But it was such an honor to work with you. You're both very inspirational leaders in the space community. And I first just want to say thank you so much for everything you did at NASA, for the Artemis program, Artemis Accords, Commercial Crew, Launch America, Mars Perseverance, and so much more during a pandemic. So I just want to say that first. But
Thank you for what you did, Suzanne.
oh, yeah. Thanks. So our first topic here today, I want to say, thank you to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, for their announcement yesterday on a national ISAM strategy. ISAM stands for In Space, Servicing, Assembly, and Manufacturing. And Redwire, we are a leader in that transformational ISAM technologies for robotic assembly, in-space manufacturing, for everything from civil space, national security space, to address challenges like climate change, orbital debris, and so much more. So we're going to start there today. And first, I'd like to say, Jim, why is it important for the U.S. to use these ISAM technologies for debris mitigation?
A great question on the debris mitigation front. There's a lot of reasons. Mike will talk about a lot of them as well, but certainly when we think about the challenge that we're facing in space right now, where we have these proliferated LEO constellations for low latency, high throughput communications, remote sensing, and all of these constellations that are going to be critical to the transformation of humanity, we have to remember that when you launch, say, 15,000 satellites, and 1.5% of them are going to be derelict, which is what the FCC has said they're going to allow. 15,000 satellites, 1.5% is derelict. That means constellations that are doing that, they're going to launch on average 225 pieces of orbital debris, which is something we've never really done before or authorized, and now we're doing it. Now, what does this mean? This means we have to have a very capable system that can grapple debris and bring it down to a lower orbit and then go back up into another orbit and sustainably continually remove these objects that are going to be, quite frankly, dangerous for the rest of the satellite operators that are out there. So this is a piece of the puzzle. There's a lot more that has to be done when you think about mitigation, space situational awareness, space traffic management, remediation. All of these things have to be done, but of course a piece of the solution is removing the debris that is up there that we know about, that we know we can remove. It also has to be put into business models, and we need regulation that ultimately compels space actors to do the right thing and remove the debris that they create.
And Mike, wait, my question? How should we leverage these ISAM technologies? And also, more importantly, for national security reasons, stay ahead of China?
So we're at an inflection point where satellites, robotics, and 3D printing are merging to create something entirely different. And by the way, these are our capabilities that we have at Redwire. And if you look at the Argonaut spacecraft, which will combine all of those things, literally a satellite that builds itself through robotics and 3D printing, we will be able to create structures in space the likes of which humanity has never seen. And because of that, the countries and the companies that excel at ISAM will be not just the economic leaders of the future, but as you mentioned, Suzanne, the national security leaders of the future. These capabilities are broad-based. They lower costs while enhancing what you can do in space, whether it's remote sensing, whether it's communications, for science, for national security, for commercial. We must, as a company and as a nation, excel because, as you mentioned, we are not in a vacuum. China, with the Shijian 21 spacecraft, which has already grappled a satellite, taken it to another orbit, we cannot afford, as a nation and as a free world, to lose the space-based robotics race to China. Which is why I'm so proud to have worked with all of you and to be here at Redwire.
Thank you so much, Mike. Well, thanks for that discussion on ISAM. Thank you again to OSTP for the announcement yesterday. We're going to move on to our next topic, HLS. We were excited that NASA announced recently that they are going to have a competition for a second human lunar lander. We're excited that the president's budget request for FY23 included $1.5 billion in there for that. I want to turn it over to Jim, our former NASA administrator. What are your thoughts about that?
Test. Yeah, so it is critically important. Anytime you have a commercial program or a public-private partnership that ultimately you want to result in commercial activity, the key is there's a number of things that you have to have. But number one, you've got to make sure you've got multiple competitors because they need to be competing on cost and innovation and safety. At the same time, each of those competitors have to go get customers that are not NASA for the purpose of driving down the costs. And if you get those two things, multiple competitors and customers that are not NASA, ultimately it saves the taxpayer lots and lots of money. So it was critically important, and I believe this from the beginning. I talked about it when I was at NASA. I talked about it after I left NASA. It was important for our country to have multiple human landing systems that are competing on cost, innovation, safety, and that are out going to get customers that are not NASA. And if we have that, it's going to be better. It's going to be a better system. It's going to be, of course, more cost effective for the American taxpayer. And NASA has done that now, which is, I think, very important. It's also important to recognize that Congress needs to fund it. And when I say fund it, I mean, no kidding, we need to fund 2 human landing systems, because what you can do when you have private capital engaged along with taxpayer investment, what you end up with is 2 systems for the price of 1. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. It's so important to have dissimilar redundancy. We saw this with Commercial Crew. One competitor had a setback, the other one moved forward. We were able to accomplish Commercial Crew. The other competitor is now engaged, and they'll be flying astronauts to the International Space Station soon. Again, driving down costs, increasing access. But we need to make sure that Congress funds the program. When they do fund it, what they'll find is that they'll get a lot more for a lot less. And I do think that there are some in Congress that would say that this is a bailout for billionaires, and I want to be clear, this is just the opposite. This is private capital, and it's not necessarily billionaires. It's companies that are raising money from private markets. This is private capital supporting activity that otherwise the taxpayer would be paying for, which is a very different thing. We need to make sure that we're engaging all of America, including private capital, in these activities that enable a more robust, a safer, better system for human activities on the surface of the moon that will, in fact, be sustainable.
Thank you so much, Jim. Mike.
So, as some of you know, I'm a recovering attorney. So, of course, I'm going to talk about procurement methodology, which I believe is as important as the technology. The public-private partnership paradigm is what has fueled this second golden age of commercial space development. Why we would turn away from a practice that has been so successful in allowing for commercial cargo, commercial crew, is beyond me. HLS continues that successful strategy. And if we want to be good stewards of taxpayer money, we should be doubling down on that. And I'm glad to see congressional support for the continuation of what is a system that requires less taxpayer money and instead leverages the private sector. I used to go to Russia for launches when I was with another company, And the Russians used to say, we're jealous of you in America. Why? Because our billionaires in Russia, they just buy yachts. Yours create rockets. Yours create space companies. I'm so proud to live in a nation where the entrepreneurial spirit is so strong that these billionaires actually come and help NASA, help achieve innovation that benefits everyone. I'm so tired of this narrative of billionaire playboys joyriding, etc. The technologies that we are seeing from these wealthy individuals are benefiting us all in society in ways that we can even only begin to imagine now, beyond saving billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money and ensuring that America is first in getting back to the moon and exploring the universe. I congratulate them, and they deserve strong congressional support.
If it's all right, so I'm gonna pile on my buddy Mike here, if that's all right. So yes, so right now there is, and I know there's some media here, so I want you to take a note of this. There is a motion to instruct for a conference on a bill that is going to support NASA programs, and in this motion to instruct, it's put out by Senator Bernie Sanders, and it basically prevents private capital from supporting America's space programs. That is a wrong-headed approach, and they can say, well, this is the government bailing out the private sector. That's not what it is. This is the private sector helping the government do things that the government would have to pay for itself if we didn't have private capital. That's what public-private partnerships are all about. And we think about, as Mike was talking about, we think about how do we communicate, how do we navigate, how do we produce food and energy, how do we do national security and defense and predict weather and understand climate. All of these capabilities are now being advanced in the private sector at a clip far faster than the government could ever innovate, and it's because of public-private partnerships. It's critically important that we understand that if we really want to unleash the value of space for all of humanity, these public-private partnerships are critically important. And the idea that you say, well, we shouldn't have the public involved in this, or we shouldn't have private markets involved, completely opposite. We need to have all of America engaged in these activities because we want to stay ahead of our greatest competitor on the planet, China, and this is how we do it.
At Redwire, we are leveraging the microgravity environment to create whole new fields in science, in biotech, in materials. We will find ways to heal the sick. We will find ways to feed the hungry and help heal our environment. I think these are all things that Senator Sanders would support. And I applaud Senator Sanders for looking out for the taxpayer and wanting to save the government money. Hey, I'm a Red Sox fan. I love maple syrup. I applaud what he's trying to do. But the best way to do that is through public-private partnerships that save money for the taxpayers, increase innovation, and give us the science to create a better world.
Thank you so much, guys. So we're going to go to the next topic here and just build on that about the importance of these private-public partnerships with commercial LEO destinations and commercial LEO development, and how the private sector can accelerate that commercial LEO development. So I want to say, Redwire is a leader in microgravity research, development, and manufacturing, as Mike was saying. And so we're using the International Space Station right now, but it's been around for over 20 years, and it's set to retire in 2030. And so we want to work now, as Congress said, we need to have a smooth transition from the ISS to commercial space stations. And so right now, we need to be working now on that smooth transition. So I wanted to turn to Mike first and say, how do we avoid this space station gap?
Well, first we use every moment we can get from the International Space Station. I'm a big believer in recycling. Why you would throw away such a precious asset before you could get every last squeeze of juice of utility from it. We must maintain it for as long as possible. And the policy should be, in the US, as I believe it currently is, that we maintain a continuous crewed presence in low Earth orbit, period. And that's going to be a combination of maintaining and extending the ISS for as long as we can, as well as transitioning to new and innovative commercial platforms that, by the way, take advantage again of the public-private partnership. And we must not fail in this endeavor, because a space station gap will be even more pernicious than what we faced previously with the transportation gap. Not only will we lose our advantage in the benefits of microgravity research and development, but you will also substantially reduce the demand for launches that will hurt American launch capability. And of course, as the former leader of international policy at NASA, America would lose its leadership position, that the diplomatic rationales, diplomatic benefits, the political benefits, the way the ISS has brought the world together would be lost if America is no longer in LEO. I believe that the ISS should get the Peace Prize, that there should be a Nobel Prize for what was done on the ISS. We cannot let that flame be extinguished. It must be continued, and we at Redwire are committed to being a big part of that process, now on the ISS and tomorrow on commercial platforms.
Thank you, Mike. And I want to say, thank you to Congress for their FY22 funding of $101.1 million for commercial LEO development. We're excited to see that the president's budget request for FY23 has $224 million for CLD, and it's really important that we get that full funding. But I'm going to turn it over to Jim now on your thoughts on this topic.
Well, first of all, you said nice things about us. Let me say something nice about you. Obviously, when you were on the Commerce Committee as a staffer, you did amazing work for NASA, helping us get the funding that we needed for the activities we were doing. And then, of course, I brought you over to NASA to run legislative affairs for NASA. Wonderful job. So thank you for all you've done. Here's, I think, the important thing. I agree completely with Mike. The International Space Station is a $100 billion project that the American taxpayer is invested in. We need to squeeze every dollar out of it. Right now, we are only at the think of the tip of the iceberg of understanding the value of microgravity. And we think about things like pharmaceuticals and immunizations, and even, Redwire is now printing human tissue in 3D, cardiovascular tissue, these kind of things, fundamentally transforming how we're going to do healthcare here on Earth from a space perspective. All that is very important. As much as we love the ISS and we want it to continue, want to squeeze every dollar, we have to understand now is a time in history when we have to accelerate. As much as we're grateful for what Congress is already doing for commercial LEO destinations, we have to accelerate given the challenges we have right now on the, you have to understand if we want to avoid that gap, we need to accelerate commercial LEO destinations. And how do you do that? We're not going to create another International Space Station. We need to have all of the different players that are involved in this project working together to make sure Congress understands what is at stake to get it fully funded. And that includes not just Redwire, but Voyager, and when we think about the Blue Origin team and even Axiom, I mean, there are opportunities here for all of these private companies to team up and say, Congress, we need to make sure we don't have a gap. We need to make sure you're fully funding it. And oh, by the way, now you might need to fund it faster than before because of the risk that we have before us.
Great. And I just want to say, Redwire, we're a great partner on Orbital Reef, developed by Blue Origin and Sierra Space. And I wanted to turn it to Mike for a moment to comment about that.
The Orbital Reef, the name is very apt because it's creating an ecosystem that, again, we need to spur a new business environment that enables the micrograv R&D on everything from printing organs. And believe me, I only have selfish interest in printing organs. I'm going to need many myself, I'm sure, in the not too distant future. And whether it's biotech, whether it's advanced materials, science, this is the future of economy, not in space, but on Earth. And who agrees with that is China. That the country that benefits, if there's a gap in America's crude presence in LEO, is the Chinese, because they recognize what we just discussed, that the future of technology is in microgravity, is in that development. And again, we're proud to be part of the Orbital Reef team with Blue Origin. I keep buying that Amazon.com. I fund it myself. With Sierra Space, with our friends at Boeing, AWS, Arizona State. It's a wonderful team to create the future that we all want with these incredible scientific and commercial advances that are enjoyed by America and the free world as a whole.
I was just going to add, it should be noted that a lot of the technology that is now being advanced commercially, as Mike just discussed, it's going to be transformational for healthcare. And Mike, we need you to not need those organs, but if you do, we want you to have them. But when we think about this, we have to remember, why is this available to us today? It's available to us today because the government, NASA, made investments in the past into the International Space Station. We have to recognize that this public-private partnership concept is not new. It has already proven to be successful, and it will continue to be proven more and more successful as time goes on.
All right, so turning it back to Terry. Terry, do we have time for questions? All right, it looks like we're going to have time for questions.
We have questions. Anyone have questions?
Hi there. My name is Vera Domchenko. I am an Orion Systems Engineer at Lockheed Martin, so thank you so much for your talk. My question is this. You recently, as in NASA, released the Appendix P request for proposal to include a second HLS lander concept. And in the past, with the Appendix H selection criteria, there were cost constraints. And that issue ultimately kind of flows back to Congress funding. So the question is this: how do we mitigate the cost constraints going forward if we truly want to have competitive spirit, a healthy space industry? How do we actually make sure that the second lander concept will not be killed in the process before it becomes a reality?
So is it all right if I just jump in?
Go for it.
Okay. So I have often said, and I really believe it, the only thing worse than a government monopoly, which, by the way, is historically how we did space programs, the only thing worse than a government monopoly, because it costs so much, is a private monopoly that the government is beholden to. Because now all of a sudden the government has to pay a private company, and if we don't pay them enough, and I'm not saying anybody has any nefarious intent, but I will tell you, if you look at the history of government programs, when there is a single provider on a cost plus basis, ultimately you get a lot of mission creep, you get a lot of cost creep and schedule delays, and it never works out well. But here's the thing: if you have a competitive market, and this is what I was saying earlier, Congress needs to understand you're going to get 2 human landing systems for what would have otherwise been the cost of 1 if you attract that private capital, and ultimately that needs to be the objective on the second human landing system, as it was on the first human landing system. Although they didn't select 2, now when they have to, it's going to be really a great for cost control. It should also be noted. Well, I'll leave it at that for now. I'll let you talk.
Well, I appreciate the question because I was really afraid we'd get through this without saying the words Artemis.
Yeah.
And I want to thank Jim Bridenstine and Suzanne and everyone who worked at NASA and is still working at NASA, transforming the dream of Artemis into reality. And you at Redwire were proud to be a partner on the Orion and our cameras and working together on all of that. But if I can turn the question around a little bit, what have you done to make sure we have a second HLS entrant? And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to reach out to your senators, to reach out to your members of Congress and express with one voice that we want America back on the moon. And a second HLS entrant is the key to doing so. I mean, that's why we were so lucky to have Jim at NASA and leading it, because Congress is the key. So please go out, and not just you in the space community, tell your friends, tell your relatives, call the Hill, support Artemis, support HLS, and support America's future on the moon.
Thank you. Do we have any more?
We have time for another question if anybody has one. Any other questions?
Otherwise, I got one more.
All right, go for
It's
it.
the most important question of the day.
You got it.
So you have really strong feelings, Mike, about Star Trek, and you have really strong feelings about Spaceballs. I think you should debate which one is best right now.
I think we are both in violent agreement that Spaceballs trumps both of them.
I will agree with you, Jim.
So I no longer work for Jim Bridenstine.
That's what he thinks.
Let me rephrase that. I'm no longer paid by Jim Bridenstine. I still work for Jim Bridenstine. And if I can respectfully disagree. And I love Spaceballs. Star Trek, how many people were inspired by Star Trek to get into the space industry? Right? I believe Star Trek, more than any other science fiction franchise, has presented a dream that we all have dedicated our lives to achieve, of not just new technology and exploring new worlds, but of a society that's diverse, that's inclusive, where we've beaten war, defeated poverty, and come together, leaving behind our petty biases and bigotries. That's what gets me up every day. That's what's driven me. And to me, that's what Star Trek is.
Look,
so live long and
hold-
prosper,
hold
everyone.
Hold on. Let me just add to this. You want to talk about diversity and inclusion? Let's talk about Barf the Mog. Barf the Mog is half man, half dog. He's his own best friend, and he's a character in Spaceballs. That's where it happens, my friends. Spaceballs is where it's at.
Say I have been compared in the past to Pizza the Hut, so I'm not against Spaceballs, just for Star Trek.
All right. So thank you both. On that note, we're going to end this Tech Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you for everyone for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Just so you know, do come back. 3:30 is our happy hour, and our next Tech Talk session starts at 4 o'clock with the importance of space during conflict and crisis. Please enjoy coffee now.